the beef between young rappers versus older rappers is not a culture war. It's all about business. I was watching and listening to Method Man's conversation on Math Hoffa's channel about the way Melle Mel strongly rebukes rappers from younger generations. Good discussion. Shout out to that channel. The issue of older rappers hating on artists from the younger generation has been a hotly debated topic in hip-hop for many years. And for the record, Melle Mel has been talking grimy about rappers who have come into the game after him for years, just as Method Man stated in the discussion. So, what is motivating Melle Mel's comments? The legendary MC, who I think performed one of the best verses in the history of hip-hop on the iconic song The Message, wants you to think his criticism of the culture is based solely on his belief that hip-hop has largely lacked artistic and moral integrity since the period of its heyday. Now, that's fair criticism actually, but I think it goes much deeper than that. Young baby boomers were the pioneers of hip-hop in the 70s. They started the culture in the streets of New York. Undisputed fact. The older Gen Xers of the Golden Age era quickly took it over and turned hip-hop into a cultural phenomenon, a well-documented fact. Then, as the rest of Generation X, my generation, came of age in the mid-90s, the culture transitioned into a massive money-making industry. Basically, as we grew up, hip-hop blew up. All this happened within a span of about 20 years, from the late 70s through the late 90s. But here's the thing, everybody wasn't invited to come along for the ride. The pioneers probably did not recognize what they started by the time the culture was in the peak of its very creative and highly conscious golden age, and they did not benefit from the growth in hip-hop's influence or revenue. In fact, even the branding of the period of hip-hop between roughly 1986 through 1993 as the Golden Age, it likely turned off more than a few pioneers who felt the importance of their era was already being marginalized. Then the culture's beloved Golden Age was aggressively dismissed and replaced by a bigger and flashier money-making operation during the largely club life and thug life driven vibe of the mid to late 90s, an era in which 40-somethings such as myself came of age. This period generated millions upon millions of dollars that circulated throughout the culture. Now, how much of that do you think trickled down to the icons of the Golden Age era? By the 2000s, the culture is a billion-dollar industry, which means it's not much of a culture at all. Certainly not in the way the pioneers imagined it, nor in the way the Golden Age artists reimagined it. Fast forward to the 2010s and the 2020s, millennials, now joined by Gen Zs, have taken over all aspects of the culture, in its sound, look, mindset, and so forth. The culture of hip-hop, or a better characterization, the industry of hip-hop, is almost completely unrecognizable to Generation X. The weight of the bag being secured by even lower-tiered artists of today is a lot heavier than the bounty most of the biggest names in the game took home during my era. So this transformative cultural dynamic sets the stage for all of the so-called beef between older artists versus younger artists in hip-hop. At the end of the day, each generation will feel slighted by the generation who comes directly after it, as well as the generations who come later. So yes, the millennials' imprint on the game is very, very, very likely to be overshadowed by the emergence of the Gen Zs, and so on and so on. But we often hear the argument that other music genres give their older artists, like the Rolling Stones, greater respect and admiration than what's given to older hip-hop artists by the younger generation. First of all, I doubt older R&B artists feel an abundance of love from younger R&B artists and their fans. But look, while I agree that older artists in other genres, such as the Beatles, generally receive more respect, I think that often recited claim is overblown. I believe that the bottom line is the bottom line, which means much of the so-called respect older artists from other genres receive is based on economics, business, money. See, some of the biggest names in music today, artists who are the biggest draws in the concert market like AC/DC, came out of genres outside of soul music. They're legendary artists from pop, rock, and country music, etc. For example, these older artists produced the biggest selling tours in their respective genres and within the music industry as a whole. The individual brands of artists like Metallica are larger than the music genres they're primarily associated with. There's a perceived high level of respect for artists like Bon Jovi because there's still a real high-pitched level of demand for their catalogs by their day one fans and even young fans discovering their music on platforms like Spotify. It's hard for the music industry to marginalize artists such as Coldplay, much less ignore them if they're still one of the biggest shows in town, so to speak. The story of hip-hop music, its ever-present narrative, is very compelling and entertaining, but largely youth-driven. Again, the core audience of hip-hop's earliest years were young baby boomers who literally remixed the sounds and styles of their older siblings and used their parents' musical dance and funk grooves as the soundtrack to their mostly party all of the time rap lyrics. The youth of hip-hop's conscious golden age, and then the cinematic gangsterism and flashy, tailored for the club sound of the 1990s and 2000s were Gen Xers, who transformed hip-hop into one of America's greatest cultural exports. But those generations, baby boomers and Gen Xers, are well past their primes now. They're well into their 40s, 50s, and even 60s. And unlike many of their contemporaries from other genres, the overall brand values of most older hip-hop artists are simply not nearly as high as that of iconic artists from other genres. Remember, I'm talking economically, not culturally. Take music catalogs for example. The sales numbers of catalogs by a variety of recording artists, producers, and songwriters in the music industry have been astronomical in the last few years. But which artists from which genres are getting the biggest checks? I think you know the answer to that. Consider this. From that Billboard magazine article, only 3% of the 131 deals in 2021 were for hip-hop catalogs, despite the fact that a quarter of U.S. consumers, which is 43% of the 16 to 34 age group, are hip-hop fans. Listen to this, quote, "Hip-hop trades at a lower multiple of revenue, which simply means hip-hop catalogs are worth far less than pop and rock music, which are genres investors typically view as more stable and predictable," unquote. Our older artists in hip-hop, such as Boogie Down Productions, as well as artists from other soul genres, as individual brands and by and large, are not worth as much financially as some of these iconic artists in other genres like pop and rock, such as Guns N' Roses. Keep in mind, I'm specifically talking about the net worth value of their music, not their other business interests. Also, sentimental value and net worth value are two very different things. So here's an example from the world of R&B. Patti LaBelle's specialty bakery brand is probably worth more than her music catalog by now, don't you think? But as much as I enjoy Patti's sweet potato pie, I love her music and that incredible voice 10 times more. So, anyway, the point is, the issue of giving our older hip-hop artists their flowers has as much to do with the business and show business as it has to do with the worthy mission of cultural preservation and recognition. And unfortunately, that's literally the bottom line. Make sure you hit the like button, and if you like the content, please subscribe to the channel. Your support is always appreciated. Here at Soulful Charts, we got the receipts. Thanks for joining me. Peace.